Hey folks, BlackCross here, and welcome to another BlackCross discussion video. And I suppose for this video case, I guess we can classify this as a deep dive into gaming, seeing as how we're going to be talking about Nier Automata as well as my personal opinions towards this game. And if you're noticing on screen right now, it looks a little different. I do apologize, but I'm trying something new actually, because I've never done this before. And if this works out really well, I'm going to make this into a video, and we may start doing it this way to some extent, but not quite, but we'll see how it goes. So in today's deep dive into gaming as well as discussion video, we're going to be talking about Nier Automata. Now, before we get into the main topic at hand, as well as my personal opinions towards Nier Automata, the Nier Automata game itself is being highly appraised in a very ridiculous matter. We're talking like absolute crazy nominations here. For starters, we have Game of the Year 2017, and it's lined up with a whole bunch of other games such as like obviously it looks like Resident Evil 7. That makes sense. Mario Odyssey definitely makes sense. Shadow of War, Assassin's Creed Origins, as well as Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. And those are just recognizable games that I can see. I'm sure there are other games in there like Yasuka, as well as Forza Horizon Zero Dawn, but I'm not sure about the other three. I can't really tell right off the bat, but the point is, Nier Automata is nominated for Best Game of the Year of 2017. It's also been nominated for Best Action, as well as Best Open World, and Best Sci-Fi, Best Story, Best Audio. It's kind of to a point to where it's a little absurd, but to a certain degree, there are certain things that I like to talk about when it comes to Nier Automata. I'm not saying that Nier Automata is bad, but I don't think it deserves quite as much of a huge debate as it's getting right now, which is kind of insane. Now, to a certain degree, I'm not saying that Nier Automata is bad. I'm just saying that I didn't care much for Nier Automata as much as like everyone else did. Like everyone else thought that this game was like the greatest RPG game that's came out. Then again, they said the same thing for Final Fantasy 15. But I don't think Nier Automata deserves as much credit as it deems. If nothing else, I feel as though there's a few constructive criticism that I feel like I need to put into this, because on the one hand, yes, it is a pretty good game on its own, but on the other hand, I find the first Nier, the regular Nier, the Nier that came out back in like what, 2008 at this point? I forgot. No, couldn't be 2008. Let me look at this real quickly. I forgot exactly when it came out exactly. Actually, it came out in 2010. Huh. Surprising. Anyway, so the thing is that Nier Automata has been getting like crazy appraisal, but honestly, there are a couple things that I feel like it needs to be kind of talked down about. Not to say that the game itself is bad, not to say that the story is bad or anything like that, but I feel like as if some of the stuff that made it good could have been either better, or for some form of matter it could have done a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for, in-depth idealism. So now let's talk about the narrative perspective. The narrative perspective being that of the main story. Honestly, the main story is that you play as 2B and then later on as 9S, as well as A2? 2A? The thing is that you're basically playing as any of those three characters throughout the story, and you're basically playing through what happens to be the extinction of mankind, as they basically tried to at first find and save humanity, or in later on you find out that the robots are basically manipulated as well as hacked and everything like that. It gets a little technical, but the point is that the story itself is a little I'm trying my best to explain the story, but I kind of lost interest in it like as soon as I got to like the third part of the game, where basically after you beat B2 and then 9S's story, you then move on to the I suppose it's called the epilogue ending or something like that. But the thing about it is that it got so convolutedly complex that I just lost interest entirely. But that's not where it gets worse. You know, sometimes a complicated story can lesser a game to a certain extent. But in this case, however, there is one thing that I did not like. And I felt like they were lazy about this. And they didn't even hide it at all. This just happened out of nowhere. And it just... Imagine a scenario where, depending on what you do in the game, makes an impact in the story, which that has been done several times, but not to a ludicrous level as this one is. And by ludicrous level, I mean like, if you see my playthrough, you know that I was basically going around a certain area because I couldn't get around a certain crack or anything like that. So I figured, okay, we'll just go this way, and that way we make it easier. The game registered that as you basically leaving the main path in order to do something else entirely, and declared it as an ending. I'm sorry, what? Now, there are some interesting side story bits that does make sense, but then when you look at the point that where you're just exploring the world, being that of the open world that it is deemed a ward of, apparently it's based on story and it is locked into that story, and depending on what path you go and what direction you go into, it locks you into a multitude of different ending scenarios. And at this point, when I discovered that fact, I was like, why even do that? You know, you build a game based on open world scenarios. You're allowed to explore that world to some degree, and depending on points in the story, you can just go and do those side quests at any time. Normally you can actually, and it won't affect the main story, and you should be able to go about it in any form of way. Unfortunately, that's where this game decides to shove its, I suppose the term I'm looking for, its core gameplay of Nier Automata. And that core element would be the multitude of different endings. And the way I looked at them, they're not different endings, they're just a whole bunch of different story ideal complex shoved into your face in a number of ways that just could have been done a little bit better. And I felt like that didn't really work as well as it could have been. Like, I mean, it's okay to do like what if scenarios, like what happens if A2 ended up actually killing Priscilla rather than just hearing her out and stuff. At the end of the day, it didn't work out very well. I felt like they really failed in that area in terms of a narrative story. So again, I wish they could have done a little bit better in terms of representation of narrative story. They could have done it a little bit simpler, maybe a little bit cliche, but at the same time, a lot of people seem to like that part, being a complex story and stuff like that. But honestly, the way I see it, the more complex you make the story, the more likely you're going to have fans kind of like disillude and just end up dropping the whole game entirely. But the gameplay itself is what kept me interested in the game in the first place, and that's why I loved Nier, and Nier Automata still had the same gameplay mechanic of structure, but everything else around the gameplay just, I suppose you could say it was lackluster at best. Now, the second thing I want to talk about too as well is the open world concept that it has. In Nier, when it comes to side quests, you had to go about going to different areas of the world that you live in to talk to certain peoples to do these different side quests. And these side quests can vary from defeating a certain bunch of monsters, getting a certain items, doing a particular quest for them and stuff like that. It's basic construction when it comes to side quests. But Nier Automata side quests, to a certain degree, some of them are really good. Actually, I will say that much. Some of the side quests are actually really good, but not all of them. I will say this much. I will say that the side quests could have been dealt a little bit better, and by a little bit better, I mean you would be allowed to do them, because some of them you couldn't do at certain points in the game. And some of them would be even cut off from the main story entirely. Now, I understand certain key point side quests. Like, for example, The Witcher 3, for example, whenever the Baron left his homestead, and you couldn't talk to him anymore, any side quest that involved the Baron was cut off from that point on. That makes sense in terms of a narrative perspective, per se. But in Nier Automata case, they just cut off randomly, and they don't even have to be involved in the main story per se. And it's like, why'd they do that? Why did they cut these particular side quests? In fact, depending on the certain points in the story, they cut them off entirely. Like, all of the side quests that was built from the beginning all the way to the point to where it got to that point got completely stopped and halted. And I'm like, why'd they do that? This is an open world, which means as an open world game, you are free to do these quests at any time. And if they involve the story in some form of way, I can understand that. Like, what's the term I'm looking for? A continuity error. And that happens. But in this game's case, none of them really impacted the main story, per se. They just basically talk briefly about why they did what they did, or what it involves in their lives, and instead it just basically kind of it separates itself from the main story, which that's what I'm trying to say. They're basically separated from the main story, which is a good thing. But in this game's case, they thought it was involved in the main story, and so they decided just to erase every side quest with the exception of like collectible stuff. And it's like, maybe, but at the same time, they could have done that part a little bit better. And especially whenever you have a game that is in depth when it comes to open world games. I mean, hell, Final Fantasy 15, Witcher 3 open world concept is that you do multiple quests at any time and you don't get stopped from doing that side quest. You can actually do them to a certain degree, and by a certain degree, in Witcher 3's case, depending on the progression of the story and depending on the character that it involves in. So, in a sense, I don't mind stuff like that, but whenever they don't involve in an impact in any way, and you get rid of it entirely, that doesn't make sense, and you could have done better with that particular programming in hand. Now, best RPG. Best RPG of 2017. Considering the lineup of games that we had that was best RPG, I know Nier Automata was one of them. Final Fantasy 15 is considered to be another good one, as well as Persona 5. Then you've got Best Action Oriented, which Final Fantasy 15 as well as Nier Automata got nominated for that as well. To say Nier Automata is the best, I think people didn't play that many games. And keep in mind, I don't play that many games per year. I play a good chunk, but I don't play a lot of newer title that comes out. So I can't say for sure about Persona 5 as to how it did, but I have played both Nier Automata and Final Fantasy 15, and in terms of RPG construction as well as action-oriented gameplay, I would put Final Fantasy 15 before Nier Automata. And this is coming from me, okay? This is coming from me. You know how much I've talked about Final Fantasy 15. I would put Final Fantasy 15 before Nier Automata because Nier Automata is nowhere near as good as... I just caught what I just said. Oh my gosh. I need to be shot in the head and just put out of my misery at this point. But, to a certain degree, Nier Automata as well as Final Fantasy 15, for both of them being made by Square Enix, they are both done very differently. And in Final Fantasy 15's case, it is an open world game. And it is a very big narrative story. And a lot of people may not agree with me on that one, but when it comes to the main construction of what Final Fantasy 15 is basically a coming of age story as well as a basically the test of manhood, as well as Noctis's story of becoming the next heir to his kingdom and trying to regain it back. So, in a sense, the story itself is actually pretty good, in my personal opinion. I liked the story, even though, yes, there were some key points that they kind of forgot to put out there. But considering the fact that we're getting these story updates for free, I think we can accept the excuse that they've had. Even they said in the past that they released Final Fantasy 15 as an incomplete game. And for an incomplete game, it's a pretty good incomplete game. And keep in mind, with these updates and everything like that, and remember, once all the DLC comes out and all the updates does get confirmed to be released, they're going to do a Ultimate Edition. I have no doubt in my mind, with all of these updates that they have done, they're going to do an Ultimate Edition of some kind. I bet my money on this one. They will do an Ultimate Edition later on. Will it be 2018? Since they're doing a Volume 2 of Season Passes with Final Fantasy 15, I imagine it to be a 2019 release probably, but that's beside the point. The point is, I would put Final Fantasy 15 in terms of the two games that I have played in the perspective of better game design and better narrative of story, as well as better battle mechanics than I would Nier Automata. That's what I'm trying to say, is that I would put 15 before Nier Automata. And the fact that Nier Automata is getting appraised to a certain degree, I feel like people forgot how to actually nominate games. And by nominate games, I mean like there are better games out there that people haven't even looked into. For example, there is the indie game industry. I'm sure there's a good handful of indie RPG games that people could have easily implemented into. I guarantee you, and I'm sure there are a lot of Persona fans who would cheer me on whenever I say this, Persona 5 would probably be a better game. And I say Persona 5 would be a better game because of two main things. Number one, it is a big game series that is spawned from the PlayStation 1, and it's made it all the way here to the PS3/PS4 because it actually got released for both consoles once it finally got released. Which surprised me, but at the same time I'm kind of glad that they did, because that means that people don't have to do a tug-of-war type thing as to which console they want to get it for, whether it is for the newer or for the older. So that did extremely well, in my personal opinion. But also, too, they didn't change anything in terms of the gameplay perspective. It is still a turn-based game. It is still involving, like, you going through each individual day of the character's life and impacting you in a sense that you develop the character in a different way when it comes to using his persona, as well as the individual trial card system that it has implemented into. And those are just basic stuff that I know for a fact that it still has. That's not including anything new that it might have done, or anything interesting or different that it has done since I have played Persona 3. I still need to play Persona 4, but I played Persona 3, and I have no doubt in my mind that Persona 5 is still the same way as Persona 3 is, just higher amplitude of graphics and different story perspective, but to the same degree the gameplay functionality is still somewhat the same. So I would say that between Final Fantasy 15 and Persona 5 are probably better games than Nier Automata's case. And again, this is just coming from me, but I felt like Nier Automata was just to satisfy fans' thirst for a sequel for a Nier game. And this could be me just saying this again. I don't have any clue as to what really is going on. But I want to say that because Nier got high appraisals when it came out, the company decided, okay, let's look into a sequel to a Nier game. And someone decided, well, why don't we do a story that happens years after the original Nier happens? And they're like, go on. And I guarantee you they were either huge sci-fi nerds and stuff like that, and they thought, okay, well, let's implement the ideal that the humans that created the androids are all gone. And the androids are continuing afterwards, trying to save humanity, even though humanity is long gone. I'm sure they were like, this is actually a good story. And they went with it. But they didn't see all of the small little stuff that went along with it. And they thought that there was no problem with it. They figured, okay, well, we can do this. This is no big deal. I feel like they didn't look into the whole scenario. I feel like as if this was just pushed out the door just for the sake of it being a sequel to a game that came out back 7 years ago. And like I said, I actually liked Nier a little bit better than Nier Automata. This actually includes the story, per se. And the biggest thing about the story is that every single time you beat the game, you go back to the middle of the game in order to continue from that to experience a different perspective. And by different perspective, I mean that the second time you go through that part, you actually get to see the individual enemies as well as their background story to discover what they were doing before you actually went up against them. And then the third time you play through it, you had a whole different ending entirely. So, again, just to say that Nier Automata was better than Nier, I wouldn't go that direction. I would say that Nier was better than Nier Automata. That's what I'm trying to say. And, again, maybe it's just me, maybe it's because I have a different ideal as to what makes a game a game. Maybe I have a different opinion about things, but ultimately, I just felt like, I don't know. Again, I saw all the awards that Nier Automata was going to have and everything like that, and I was like, okay, I wanted to talk about Nier Automata anyway. Now I can talk about Nier Automata because, quite frankly, this is actually getting kind of dumb. Like, I can't stress that enough. I thought Nier Automata was an okay game, but for a point to where it's being awarded multiple awards versus Final Fantasy 15 and Persona 5, it's just, Again, this is just me. I'm just the one guy out of millions of people who actually love this game, and I'm the one who didn't think it was that fantastic. It could have been better, in all honesty, but that's just me. At any rate, though, that's going to be it for this video. Let me know in the comments below what you thought about this system thing. I'm not going to do it all the time, but anytime that I see an opportunity to use this, I will end up using this. So, let me know in the comments below of what you think, if you actually enjoyed it, the way I'm doing it and everything like that. I was just experimenting and also doing a deep dive into gaming with Nier Automata. So, anyway, though, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next video. This is BlackCross signing off. Take care, guys.